Go any further, we need to underscore a few points about intangible heritage that have been articulated by others already. So a consciousness of one's heritage is not something that we can take for granted. Like a consciousness about having culture, heritage is a particular discursive field. All right? So if heritage is discursive, we might say that all heritage is in some way intangible. Here I'm drawing on the ideas of Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimbutt. Even though these intangible discursive areas have very tangible and material effects in some cases. So the hope of material change may motivate some of the heritage rush that we see in Bolivia. Desire for respect for, control over their cultures may also motivate their fervor. International entities like UNESCO and WIPO, which is the World Intellectual Property Organization, have attempted to separate cultural rights programs and intellectual rights in their economic form. So UNESCO is supposed to do the cultural thing, and WIPO is supposed to do the economic thing. But these two fields have never been successfully separated in practice. And ideas about in Bolivia about heritage have always blurred these boundaries between economic and cultural rights distinctions. So in the rest of the talk, we want to present some Bolivian understandings of heritage, particularly in relation to this blurring of the economic and cultural rights in this country's anti-neoliberal moment. While some interpretations correctly assess Bolivian cultural politics as neoliberalism as usual, our situated analysis and view of multiple levels of indigeneity bring us more in line with a kind of global assemblage. In overly simplified terms, neoliberalism is certainly a major part of this picture and has not disappeared even in Bolivia's radical process of change. But assemblage becomes useful as we look for a way to account for the diverse local articulations of neoliberalism's unexpected effects. So first we discuss some of the known heritage troubles in Bolivia. We're going to talk about two examples, one emphasizing the problems of nationalism and the dilemmas of recognizing secret indigenous heritage. Then we're going to take three ethnographic encounters that emerged in workshop discussions and related activities. So the first ethnographic encounter is about the heritage discussion in the workshop itself. The second one is about a very heated discussion that took place at the La Paz Council of Cultures meeting, and this is a new entity existing at the departmental level in Bolivia since 2010, since the law of autonomies have been put into place. Departments, by the way, are like states in Bolivia. The third ethnographic encounter is through a digital world of email exchanges and web-accessible documents written by indigenous-inspired musicians who live in the city of Cochabamba. So, let's talk about the Devil Wars. On Bolivia's heritage troubles, we begin with the tale of the Devil Wars. When Miss Peru, voila, Karen Schwartz, wore the Diablada devil dance costume in the 2009 Miss Universe pageant, the Bolivian Minister of Cultures accused her of appropriating cultural heritage. And shortly after, Bolivians called for an extraordinary performance of this music and dance in the city of La Paz. The Ministry of Cultures also issued a statement indicating that CENAPI, which is the intellectual property organization in Bolivia, would begin an international campaign to reclaim this Bolivian dance as cultural heritage. In support of its case, Bolivians cited UNESCO's 2001 proclamation of Oruro's carnival as intangible heritage of humanity. Now, the devil dance is a major expression of Carnival of Oruro. Now, these statements of indignation even included talk of turning to the International Tribunal in The Hague. Now, as a way to set off this present moment under Evo Morales, it should be noted that Miss Chile wore a Diablada costume in the Miss Universe pageant in 1983, 1984, and 1989, and it did not provoke the same kind of response on the part of Bolivians. So these processes also need to be understood within the broader context of Bolivia taking control over its own resources. From the Bolivian perspective, outsiders have always been the ones to gain from the country's resources, whether it's silver, tin, gas, which Evo Morales then takes control over, or dances and culture, as we see here in Heritage. So, in line with the response, with responses that privilege proprietary nationalism, the legislature has begun what the Comoros might call lawfare, John Collins might call enclosure, and Michael Brown might call the Bavarian iron cage of total heritage protection. So the legislature has taken a piecemeal approach, and they've been passing laws that declare as intangible heritage and national property specific dances, all right? The Diablada dance and its broader context of urban ritual feasts draw on many different participants. People of indigenous background, mestizo background participate in these rituals, and they include rehearsals over months. They rehearse lots of economic processes of costumes, masks, beer, the sale of beer. So what I'm getting at here is that Oruro's carnival hardly fits the profile of a culture which is in danger of disappearing. And we'll return to that vibrancy a little later. So UNESCO's recognition instruments have caused problems at more local levels, okay, as well. If we look at the 2003 award that went to the quote-unquote Andean cosmovision of the Kayawaya. Now the Kayawaya are herbal healers who live in a Quechua-speaking island surrounded by Aymaras. They're not on an island, they're just as an island among Aymara speakers. And they are traditional healers. Molly Callahan, in her dissertation research, followed the award's aftermath of the Kayawaya and found that besides homogenizing a very diverse group of healers and pinning them to specific circumscribed territory, the award called for a documenting of secret knowledge that was supposed to be accessible only to some ritual healers and specialists. As in other cases concerning control of indigenous secret knowledge, some of the conflict here is among the Kayawaya themselves, not necessarily between the Kayawaya and those outside. So the UNESCO award brought these unintended, but we would add not unexpected, consequences of heritage governance. So these problems I've been talking about are quite familiar in the field of heritage. Scholars and even those who designed the UNESCO instruments recognize certain inevitable problems of the intangible heritage program. First, bureaucratic registration wants everything to be very clearly bounded, right? Drafters of the convention found no way to sidestep the dominant role of nation states, so you get very patriotic feelings going behind the proposals rather than any sort of cross-national proposals. In relation to indigenous issues, Henrietta Marie has found that the convention itself falls far below other benchmark documents like ILO 169 and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In relation to indigenous peoples, cultural rights claims can be quite inconsistent with state heritage initiatives. As Rosemary Kumba said in one place, James Clifford in another, they note that indigenous peoples often link heritage with other pressing claims like territory and self-determination. So while in the best of moments heritage is construed as a cultural rights program, the resulting policies can end up looking a lot like what Rob L. Bro has called a cultural regulatory regime for the cultural marketplace. So heritage problems dwell precisely at the intersection of these hardly separable economic and cultural fields, and the Bolivian trajectory in this area shows no exception to this rule. Regina Bendix suggests that global instruments have vested the concept of heritage with cultural capital, and that this arena has become a new terrain of struggle. We might also consider how the Comoros have suggested that in the age of Ethnicity Inc., Bourdieu's distinctions between cultural and economic capital have been completely collapsed. We argue that recent Bolivian politics of a more radical shade, as well as the accompanying constitutional changes, have not brought shifts in Bolivia's heritage politics. Under Morales, the government skillfully calls upon international instruments to bolster nationalist sentiments, and he hardly backs away from proprietary frameworks that seek to circumscribe and enclose cultural expressions as national property. But maybe we shouldn't be so surprised about this. Nation states will be nation states. The social movement state, to use Brett Gustafson's term, cannot escape the bureaucratic and nationalist dances that it inherited. So we argue that under this pro-indigenous state, even more acute forms of possessive indigeneity have been buttressed as part of the national project. And this is a process that reflects a long history of heritage as property of the state. We're not going to be talking about that history because now we'd like to turn to the ethnographic moments that we want to highlight. And specifically turning first to the workshop that we organized. So for this activity, we brought together 20 Bolivians involved in different areas of culture and media, some of them of indigenous backgrounds. The aim of the workshop was to open up civil society discussions on issues of cultural property, and to do so with a group of individuals who are usually not in conversation with one another. Entitling the event, using the terms creativity, recognition, and indigeneity, we purposely avoided direct references in the title to cultural property, authors' rights, piracy, heritage. These are all very hot-button issues that at other roundtable events we found that people just took very rigid positions about, this belongs to me, this person stole my song, accusations of theft and piracy, etc. So, with the workshop activities planned through small group discussions as well as larger plenary discussions, we hoped not to avoid those hot-button topics, but to open up alternative spaces for more sustained dialogues about them. With the organizing team, which beyond ourselves included 2 Bolivians, Juan Carlos Cordero and Bernardo Rosso, and also a Hampshire student, Phoebe Smolin, we spent hours via Skype and then in Bolivia discussing who should be invited. We sought to balance highland and lowland representation, particularly given the Andean-centric position of the Morales government. We also attempted to think strongly about gender balance. It was also another strong consideration throughout the organizing, although I have to say we did not come close to achieving it. We also were wary of having too many participants who worked directly with the central or local autonomous governments. So, for example, could so-and-so of the Ministry of Cultures obtain permission to miss work and then leave her state obligations, work obligation at the door, and participate as a musician and member of civil society? We ended up having 2 people from the Ministry of Cultures, but there were many more on the list. We had to sort of taper it down. And then of the autonomous government in Santa Cruz, the local government, we had 1 person from there as well. Others from the lowland region, but not from the government. As we circled through names of possible participants, there were other sort of pressing political issues that also we had to sort of think about as we were trying to get participants. The Tiffany's March, the second march, had just arrived in La Paz, for those of you who are not familiar. The Tiffany's, was a huge conflict with the Bolivian state on the part of indigenous groups in the lowland areas of Bolivia, where a road was supposed to be constructed through this area, through indigenous territory, and they didn't want it to be constructed. So they twice marched to La Paz claiming, we do not want this, we do not want this. There has since been a consulta, a consultation, and they are supposedly have said yes. There are people who question the legitimacy of this consulta, but however, in the time when we were organizing this workshop, they had set up a tent city in La Paz, and things were still very hot around this particular issue. So these kinds of political issues determined who might have time to come to our 4-day workshop on things that seemed rather, tame, like creativity and recognition. In an attempt to ensure very, sort of focused discussion, the workshop was held in the hotel in Coroico, located in the tropical Yungas region. After 2 full days of conversation there, we all returned to La Paz for a public conversation with experts, which was hosted by the Museum of Ethnography and Folklore, MUSEF. Now, we didn't want this final event to sort of devolve into the usual, the experts talk to the audience and tell them the facts about intellectual property and heritage. So instead, the event was modeled on the BBC radio program that's coming from Henry, the BBC radio program called The Moral Maze. And this is where questions are put to experts in relation to very contentious themes. So during this final event, workshop participants questioned the Minister of Cultures, Pablo Brooks, as well as the director of Bolivia's Music Royalty Collection Society, so BOLECOM, and also representative of the National Intellectual Property Service, SENAPI.